If marriage is a mirror, these husband horror stories show the cracks. Shocking confessions, hidden rooms, and the dark secrets he hid from me staring from the other side. Tonight, Dread Scribe writes again. Before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe for more chilling stories. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing where everyone is tuning in from, and if there's a story you'd like me to cover next, I'd love to hear it too. That morning began like every other. His hurried footsteps, the scent of his coffee lingering in the kitchen, the faint creak of the door as he left for work. The world outside was pale with winter light, quiet enough that I could hear the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence he left behind. I was halfway through cleaning the counter when I saw it, his briefcase still resting by the chair. He never forgot it. It was his second heartbeat. When I reached to move it, a corner of red caught my eye beneath his planner. The color didn't belong in our house. Everything here was muted. Grays, creams, the soft beige he'd insisted made him feel calm. The envelope, however, was blood bright, a shade you couldn't ignore, like a wound that refused to heal. I hesitated before touching it as though it might pulse. The paper felt warm, almost alive, and inside was a single photograph. The woman in the picture was standing in our kitchen. My kitchen. Her face was turned slightly toward the window, smiling at something or someone out of frame. I didn't recognize her. She wore a soft blue dress, and behind her, on the counter, sat the same ceramic mug I was holding. For a long moment I stared, my pulse drumming like distant thunder. At first I told myself it was old, perhaps from before we moved in, before renovations, before us. But everything in that image was current, down to the faint scratch on the cabinet door I'd made last week. My logic tried to rewrite itself, inventing scenarios. Maybe he'd hired someone, maybe it was a design reference, maybe it was meaningless. But then why the secrecy? Why hide it beneath his planner? The day stretched on like a fog. When he came home, I pretended nothing was wrong. I asked about his day, smiled at the right moments, studied the way his eyes avoided mine when I mentioned the briefcase. His voice had the faint tremor of someone measuring every syllable. Later that night, as he showered, I checked his phone. No messages, no photos, just silence. Yet every so often it lit up, no sound, no vibration, just a brief flash of white. That's when the smell began. A faint perfume drifting through the hallway, soft and floral, one I didn't wear. It lingered near the bedroom door, near the kitchen, near him. Once I even thought I saw the shimmer of movement, a shadow brushing past the window, though the curtains were still. My chest tightened with that animal instinct of being watched, though reason begged me to laugh it off. But what reason can explain laughter in an empty room? I heard it, faint, melodic, like someone giggling softly from the hallway. I froze. My reflection in the microwave glass was wide-eyed, trembling. The house seemed to breathe around me. When I finally turned off the lights and slipped into bed beside him, his arm found me instinctively. But his skin was cold, and before I drifted into uneasy sleep, I caught a whiff of that same perfume, sweet, alien, and impossibly close. Morning arrived like a thin sheet of ice over a deep river, glossy, fragile, promising the illusion of safety. I made coffee to drown the perfume that haunted the night, but the scent threaded the steam as if memory had a body. He was gentle, careful, the way people move around a sleeping animal. When he left, I stood at the threshold and aligned the angles from the photo with the room. Window, counter, mug, my breath fogging. By noon I decided to test reality the way you test a suspect's step on a staircase. I placed the mug where it had been, stood where the unknown woman had stood, tilted my face toward the window. Nothing, no whisper, no apparition, just an air charged and prickling like the sky before lightning. But what I didn't expect was a key turning in the back door, as someone matched their breathing to mine. I froze. The key completed its circle, but the door didn't open. Silence pooled like water in a saucer. In the hallway mirror, my reflection wavered, as if heat rose from a fire. I moved toward the sound, each step syrup thick. The lock reversed with a soft click and footsteps receded across the porch. When I opened the door, the yard was empty, frost sparkling along the railing like salt. That night I confronted him with a scientist's calm. Over dinner I mentioned the perfume. He laughed softly and said I had a sensitive nose. I mentioned the door. He blamed swollen wood and temperature. When I said I'd found a red envelope, something in his gaze shuddered, like a window catching on a nail, then opened with practiced ease. He said he didn't know what I meant. His fork ticked the plate, a metronome counting down. After he slept, I returned to the briefcase. Beneath the planner, beneath the crimson envelope, was a second photograph. Same woman, same kitchen. This time she faced the camera. It was my face, only softened, hair longer, expression warmed to a glow I hadn't worn in months. The date in the corner was tomorrow. The room tilted like a boat slipping its moorings. Then my phone vibrated with a call from his number while he breathed steadily beside me. I answered. His voice asked if I could let him in. He'd forgotten his key. The back door trembled again, patient. Perfume gathered behind me like a tide creeping under a door. From the bedroom, the shape of my husband rose and started down the hall. I stood in the seam between rooms, a hinge in the body of the house, and felt the choice split like dry wood. I opened the door. He stood there, my husband and not my husband, smiling with relief that felt rehearsed, like a photograph stepping into flesh. Behind him, winter light burned like a clean blade. Down the hall, the other one said my name. That was the truth. There were no strangers here, only different exposures. I stepped back. Both stepped in. The house closed its doors softly, the way a mouth closes over a secret. At sunrise, the neighbors swore they heard laughter in our kitchen. The house smelled of coffee and perfume. 3 mugs cooled on the counter like small resort. Simple rule, a ribbon tied around a bomb. I kept it because love is a collection of small obediences, and because the brass key on his ring sounded final. At night, the house exhaled its sighs, but beneath them grew another music, a hum swelling after midnight as if the earth's ribs were singing. I said it was the furnace. I said the mind invents teeth for shadows. The hum thickened over weeks, pressure on the air that made glass whisper. I logged it like a scientist cheating on faith. Decibels, timestamps, barometric dips. The numbers rose when the moon thinned, fell whenever he traveled. Ozone and bleach threaded the stairwell, a metallic scent like rain that forgot how to be gentle. I clung to metaphor because it felt safer than evidence. When the storm arrived, it erased the neighborhood in one stroke. Power died with a gasp. Every room held its breath, yet the hum under the door stayed, steady as a pulse. Curiosity stopped being sin and turned into triage. I found the flashlight, its beam a narrow bone, and pressed my palm to the door. The wood was warm, but what I didn't expect was the lock, radiating heat like a fevered coin. The key wasn't there, so I used a butter knife and a memory of watching him. The latch yielded with a patient sigh. Stairs fell into a black throat, the air cupping my face with damp hands. I descended, counting softly, and with each step the hum divided, high tones fanning like a hidden choir. Cobweb filaments brushed my wrist, sticky, fine, the texture of old promises. The basement wasn't a storage cave. It was an operating room for ideas. Workbenches formed an altar, soldering irons asleep, spools of wire like nests, glassware catching the beam in cold shards. 3 aquariums hummed with pumps. Instead of fish, they held machine organs, bellows and diaphragms breathing in choreography. Notes covered a corkboard, his handwriting secretive, equations marching in ranks. I recognized the title from his grant. He had said bioacoustics, how whales sing, how bats map the night. But this was Frankenstein written in Wi-Fi and carbon fiber. The schematics showed a coffin-shaped chamber, foam-lined and threaded with transducers. Electrodes curled from a headrest. A hair of his was taped beneath baseline. Progress, I realized, was his second religion. Our marriage, the parish he rarely attended. Part of me still wanted to believe this was therapy. I touched the chamber and the hum climbed, a ladder rung by rung. On a monitor, color bands jittered, spectrograms turning sound into weather. Glass trembled. My ribs thrummed like strings. A mason jar shivered across a ruler, leaving a snail's shine of condensation. The smell went metallic and my teeth ached as though a storm had rented a room in my skull. I hit a key because fear prefers action. The program opened a file labeled Phase 4. The tone sharpened, slicing the room into thin panes. From inside the chamber came a soft, deliberate knocking. 3 beats, a pause, 3 again. The rhythm his fingers traced on the steering wheel. I set my hand on the lid. The hinge was warm, almost tender. The knocking stopped and something on the other side touched back softly. The warmth under my palm deepened, a heartbeat braiding into the metal, and the soft contact returned, tentative as a bird on a sill. The gasket exhaled plastic bleach breath across my wrist. He hadn't built a prison. He'd built a chrysalis. That certainty arrived with nightmare clarity. Love, I realized, isn't a blindfold. It's a magnifying glass set over tinder. And I was burning. Memory lined up its protests with clinical neatness. Sleepless weeks, grit in my eyes, headaches like tuning forks struck behind the skull. He'd trained his body to obey frequency the way tides obey the moon. If the sea can be tugged by sky, a man can be tugged by hum. But the room tilted toward the sound as if studs and nails listened. I lifted the latch. The lid opened a crack and blue pulse unrolled across his skin like lightning trapped under lake water. Electrodes mapped his temples. Lashes flickered. A silver thread trembled at his lip. He wasn't asleep. He was in resonance, chest moving on rhythm the machine composed. The spectrogram bloomed, colors climbing like heat over asphalt. The air tasted metallic, penny bitter. At the console, safety notes in his cramped hand. Ramp down 5 minutes, never cold stop, preserve microcurrents. The cursor blinked over phase 4, patient as an animal. I thought of vows. Groceries carried through doors. The courage required to choose mercy or truth. Then the storm spoke outside and the basement replied, 2 voices answering through the floor like pipes. House batteries woke with a cough. The hum braided with thunder, 2 rivers meeting, and the concrete vibrated like a drumhead. He opened his eyes and looked at me as if I were shore and horizon. No words, a harmonic with shape, meaning felt rather than heard. It said hold. It said listen. It said this hurts and it is necessary. I initiated ramp down. Numbers walked backward, patient as nurses. The pitch climbed once, stubborn, then yielded. His muscles fluttered like a moth. Sweat cooled on his sternum. Electrodes softened to green. But the house answered, ductwork purling like surf, refrigerator joining the chord. As though the neighborhood were a choir and my husband its tuning note. Raised to lead, he sat up slowly, changed in undeniable ways. The whites of his eyes held an opal sheen. His wrists vibrated beneath my fingers. My bones became a tuning fork when he touched me, and for a moment I heard the grid humming through town, lines, lights, the river of current, like a city breathing in sleep. Awe cracked open, bright and frightening. We had known monsters as masks. We hadn't prepared for devotion that made a body porous. He tried to stand. I steadied him, both shaking like reeds. The console chimed, baseline achieved. I powered systems down in stages, each click a rung back to human weather. Outside, the storm thinned to mist. Inside, silence felt new, like snow erasing footprints. By morning, I sealed the chamber and boxed the notes, but the house kept a memory. Some nights, 3 knocks lift from the floor, and the refrigerator answers. I sleep upstairs with my ear to the hum, and he sleeps beside me, quieter now, as though the sea has agreed to share him. He brought the voice recorder home like a souvenir from a museum of sleep. Small, black, and polite on the nightstand. A clinical experiment, dream mapping for better rest, yet he treated it like a pilgrimage. The red light blinked at dusk, a tiny heartbeat. I told myself this was hygiene for the psyche, nothing more threatening than fluoride for thoughts. The first nights were soft static and breath. In the mornings, he played them back while coffee steamed between us, and the house became a lab. I watched his face tilt with wonder, like a satellite dish catching a weak star. But what I didn't expect was how quickly the recordings learned our rhythms and began to anticipate them. On the 5th night, amid the rustle of sheets, a whisper curved through my headphones. It was my voice, intimate as a pulse under a thumb, saying things I had never said. The vocabulary was mine, the clipped vowels, the swallowed consonants, but the sentences had been rearranged, coded like a forgotten map. I sat very still while cinnamon toast cooled into cardboard, listening to a message apparently mailed from my sleeping mouth. I invented comforting scaffolding. Microphones breed pareidolia. Mine stitch patterns like quilts. Couples adopt each other's music. He logged time codes with precision that looked like devotion. The more I explained, the less explained me. Then the recorder captured a detail no placebo could stage, the exact scrape of my wedding ring across the table, 5 minutes before it actually happened. We turned the device off at bedtime as a test and hid it in a drawer. Still, the next morning's file existed, time-stamped, the waveform rising like the coast of a country we hadn't sailed yet. My voice again, only this time it didn't murmur. It instructed. Count back from 10. Put the glass on the left. Do not wake him. The list carried the calm of anesthesia. I obeyed without admitting I was obeying, as if the words had been anchored inside me and were surfacing. Sleep became a corridor lined with mirrors, each reflecting a slightly older me. He tracked sleep cycles. I tracked dread. The shirt he left on the chair smelled of clean cotton with an edge of rain, like examining the last warmth in a cup. But neither of us expected the way daytime began to echo, small events pre-recorded and then fulfilled, like thunder rehearsing before the storm. I recorded myself awake to reclaim ground. Doing dishes, I spoke a nonsense sentence, a code phrase too absurd to guess. That night's dream file contained it, but the file began 2 hours before I said the words. The sound carried the same kitchen acoustics, the same drip from the faucet, like time had folded into a wallet and slipped a duplicate bill into my pocket. He started sleeping with his hand on my shoulder, tethering us like astronauts. The recorder's red light glowed even unplugged, a coal refusing to die. Sometimes I woke to the sense of breath at my ear, not warm but cool, as though the room practiced speech. The last track we opened ended with a hush, then a faint click, our bedroom door settling, though neither of us had moved. If the voice was mine, who was doing the listening? If the voice was mine, who was doing the listening in the dark? I left the lamp on low that night, a moon manufactured by a switch, and set the recorder on the bookshelf facing the wall. He slept on his side with one hand open as if offering change to a passing dream. I promised myself I'd keep vigil like a lighthouse, keeping books on the horizon it saves and loses in equal measure. At 2:17 the heater coughed and the house settled. I whispered a date under my breath to mark the time like chalk on a door frame. The red light remained dark. We had removed the batteries. Still, a thready presence ran under the floorboards, the way water sounds inside a pipe. But what I didn't expect was the scent of peppermint rising from the hallway. The one tea he makes when he can't sleep. I followed it and found the kitchen with its stainless moon of a sink and the window black as a pupil. The room listened. The air had that electric woolly thickness storms bring. On the table lay his notebook open to a page where my name appeared in tidy columns, dates, arrows, a cartographer mapping tides. Beside it sat the recorder, though I knew I'd left it in the bedroom. The red light blinked once like a wink from a grave. Back in bed, he murmured, a word I couldn't catch, and tightened his grip on the sheet. I pressed my ear to his shoulder as if listening for wails through bone. Sleep architecture, I thought, cycles stacked like floors in a hospital. If the voice belonged to the 9th floor, what waited in the stairwell between? The question moved around the room like a moth nosing a lamp. Morning brought evidence dressed as coincidence. The audio file, time-stamped 103, contained the sound of a cup set down, followed by my laugh, followed by his spoon-tapping porcelain. Those exact sounds occurred at 8:14 while we ate oatmeal, each beat matching like teeth in a zipper. He watched the waveform scroll with the hungry focus of a diver reading oxygen. He looked both delighted and thinner, the way candles look right before a wish. We agreed to one last test. No devices, no clocks, no pens. We would sleep in the guest room, the plainest room, a palette knife scraping the canvas back to white. I wrote a sentence on my palm to anchor me in waking. He kissed it like a seal on a document, but what neither of us expected was the room's response. A faint, deliberate hush, like a mouth lowering over a microphone. Sometime deep, where minutes don't wear numbers, the sound began. The recorder wasn't there, but a recording unfolded anyway, braided into the air the way rain braids into screens. First my whisper, counted backwards, then quiet, then a breath that was not in the room. The voice that followed was his, clear as winter water, speaking close enough to fog the glass of thought. I'm awake. I lay very still, hearing dawn unspool behind the blinds slowly. Ending section. Reflective ending. I realized waking isn't proof of escape. It's simply the moment you admit the dream has your voice too, and you answer back. We ripped the closet down to its bones on a Saturday. plaster falling like gray snow, the room smelling of chalk and old rain. Behind the studs, I found a tar-sealed panel, the rectangle of a secret. My pry bar kissed the seam, and the board came loose, revealing a mirror the color of lake ice, foxed mercury, edges, a surface that breathed. I lifted the flashlight. My reflection didn't move. Instead, a future unrolled like a rug. The glass showed our bedroom with tomorrow's laundry folded and a chipped bowl of pears on the dresser. One pear wobbled, slid, and fell with a thud I felt in the ribs. I turned. No bowl, no fruit. Morning made me forget until I washed a bowl and it slipped from my hand, landing exactly where the reflection had promised. Coincidence was a doorman guarding a dark hallway. I started collecting prophecies. The mirror displayed a newspaper on the doorstep. Minutes later, the truck coughed past. It showed my husband knotting a blue tie I hadn't ironed. He arrived whistling. It showed a mug fractured along a hairline crack. That afternoon, my thumb found the same invisible fault. But what I didn't expect was his face in the glass hardening daily, as if the mercury were wintering inside him. I mapped intervals like a careful thief. The visions lagged reality by hours or days. When I placed a book on the nightstand, the mirror sometimes refused to include it, as though the future disliked being edited. Other times, the book appeared elsewhere, moved by hands I couldn't see. Testing the thing felt like arguing with weather. The more I questioned it, the more it learned my questions. Origins became my anchor. I called the contractor, the previous owner, a glazier whose father once sealed second sight glass for seance rooms. Houses accrete beliefs like barnacles. Ours had been fitted for looking forward. Under the trim, I found a penciled date and a smear of wax. In a box of junk, a flyer promised provable intimations. The font was theatrical. The price was handwritten. Still, experiments are only brave until they work. One evening, the mirror showed the kitchen under twilight, copper pans blinking like coins. My husband stood behind me in the reflection, expressionless as statue, his hand hovering at my throat with the tenderness of a violinist choosing where to place the bow. The real kitchen held only the refrigerator's hum and sink drip metronome. I watched the glass like a bruise ripening in time-lapse. I changed variables, staying late at work, leaving lights on, moving knives to the garage. The timeline corrected itself like a river finding its old channel. He entered earlier or later, but always colder, pupils dark, mouth sealed. My reflected face looked like a mask someone else had worn all day. He was becoming someone I didn't recognize. Worse, the glass insisted I was too. That night, the mirror shed static and displayed a timestamp I knew as tonight. In it, the closet door opened from the inside. His eyes didn't look at me. They looked through me, as if measuring where the body ends and the echo begins. I reached for the switch and saw his hand in the glass finally settle on my throat. I didn't flip the switch. I stood in the dark with the closet mouth open and the future breathing on the glass, frost forming above my pulse. The timestamp pulsed in the corner like a constellation. Somewhere pipes ticked as if counting me down. When the minute changed, the reflection held steady. My body framed like evidence, his jaw set, his hand hovering at that hinge where voice lives. I taped the mirror while it still glowed, brown strips crossing it like bandages on an eye. Cloth over glass should be enough, I told myself. Fate hates interference the way a river hates dams. But what I didn't expect was the glow persisting through fabric, a dim aurora that turned linen into skin. It felt less like I was hiding the future and more like I was swaddling it. I researched by lamplight, skimming archives and records, finding references to psychomancy and Victorian trick mirrors, to silver backing salted with chemicals that respond to oils in breath. Every story warned about gaze. Look too long and the mirror looks back. I thought of my husband's recent silences, the way winter had moved into his shoulders, and wondered if the glass had been practicing on him first, sanding him down like a shoreline. Night arrived, punctual. I set my phone's seconds hand to the timestamp, then left it face down. I stood where the reflection had placed me. The room had that waiting room hush, a carpet of silence laid wall to wall. When the front door closed, it sounded ordinary and still wrong, like a familiar word suddenly spelled without vowels. The mirror, mummied, pulsing, showed the faint outline of our shapes approaching each other like two storm fronts. He stepped into the doorway soft with caution, a toolbox in one hand. The face in the mirror was not the face in front of me. The glass version had the solemn chill of a courtroom. In the real room, his mouth softened. He lifted his free hand, palm open, a gesture that used to steady me like a railing. My throat tightened anyway. Isn't this how superstition works? Choose a story and watch the world audition for it. The minute turned. The mirror's hand rose to my throat. In the air between us, his hand rose too, but toward the taped glass, not me, as if to peel it back. I saw myself from ground level and from the ceiling at the same time, split like a coin banged into two thinner coins. The toolbox slipped and kissed the floor. Instinct moved faster than thought. I reached his wrist and missed, and then found skin, my fingers closing where the reflection had indicated. He inhaled sharply. His pulse jumped against the heel of my hand like a trapped sparrow. In the mirror, my eyes were cold, perfectly still, a lake sealed in January. I let go. He stepped back, the toolbox a small animal between us. I peeled one strip of tape. The reflection held only me, eyes rhymed with winter. In the tarnish, a backward scrawl surfaced. My maiden initials pressed into the silver. The hand at my throat was mine. We resealed the wall, yet at night I feel glass in my chest. Something moving as I breathed, wedged between HOA notices and a tire coupon. An envelope from the Caledonia County clerk. Inside, a deed with our names braided together, his last anchoring mine, granting us a cabin off an unnumbered Vermont road. He laughed, called it a clerical hiccup. The paper bristled like a living leaf. Mistake or not, the coordinates sat there like a dare. I drove up on a Saturday that smelled like wet bark. The highway unwound like a long apology. The farther north I drove, the quieter the radio became until only tire hiss, and a feeling thin as fishing line pulled me forward. Pines sharpened the air. When the GPS surrendered, a hand-painted sign pointed me toward a road the color of old coins. The cabin crouched between birch trunks, green paint peeled into fish scales. A tin star rusted above the porch like an exhausted compass. I expected dust, the flat breath of a place sealed too long. Instead, when I pushed the door, warm air met me, wood smoke and rosemary, like a dog that had learned my scent. The living room wore itself easily, boots by the mat in his size, a denim jacket slung across a chair, a book face down with a receipt marking last night. Beside the mantel, a grocery list in my husband's handwriting curled, lemons, rye, rosemary, nail set. My name wasn't there. But what I didn't expect was the envelope on the table addressed in an unfamiliar hand to Mrs. Daniel Haynes. I stood very still and listened to the house breathe. I opened drawers with the gentleness you reserve for bandages. In the bedroom, shirts that would fit him hung with a patience that felt practiced. A second toothbrush leaned into the first as if whispering. In the closet, a shoebox held letters tied with blue ribbon, addressed to a woman named Claire. Soft, domestic notes signed with my husband's name, warm as bread. The calendar on the wall circled Sundays that were not ours. The photos broke something simple. A family stood at a lake, him in a wool beanie, his arm around a woman I'd never met, a child mid-laugh, hair pinned with a blue beret. He was smiling in that shape I used to own. My knees went water. I sat on the bedspread patterned with small pine cones and felt like a map with the borders wrong. I told myself there would be explanations. Witness protection for feelings, theater for the state, a cousin, a fundraiser, a long prank. Yet the house answered with its inventory, his cufflinks in a dish, his cologne breathing from a sweater, 2 coffee mugs left drying mouth down like unblown whistles. The second bedroom held a half-finished puzzle of Vermont in fall. The missing piece was the county with our deed. Dusk pressed itself against the windows, violet and patient. I set my phone on the table and dialed his number, breathing with the ring, like before a plunge. In the silence between tones, I heard a car turning onto gravel outside, the sound granular as sugar. Headlights swept the wall like searchlights across my chest. The doorknob turned as if recognizing a hand that had been waiting. A key slid home, paused and then tested the lock, gentle as a question I wasn't ready to answer. The key paused in the lock like a held breath, then turned with a practiced click. I stood in the living room where other versions of me must have stood, headlights washing the photos until every smile looked amphibious. The door opened on the silhouette that belonged to both the life I knew and the life on the mantel. The engine died. The quiet that followed felt like a verdict. He stepped inside, his gaze crossing the boots by the mat, the letters to Mrs. Daniel Haynes, the ribboned box. Familiar features rearranged the way a map folds. Same coastlines, different country. I asked how long. His answer was a clean cut. Years. My body tried on reactions like coats, heat, ice, nothing, while the kettle hissed as if it had been waiting. He set 2 mugs on the counter with the accuracy of ritual. Mint steamed. Rosemary braided the air. The choreography of belonging performed itself without permission. But what I didn't expect was the question he set between the mugs. Which version of me did you find? It fit the room like a key in a lock I didn't know I owned. I studied the beanie photo, his arm across Claire's shoulders, the child with the blue beret mid-laugh. I studied the deed in my bag where my name braided to his, the grocery list tallying ordinary grace. Versions stacked like plates ready to shatter. He slid a mug toward me, not touching. Heat climbed through ceramic like dawn up a window. I imagined the drives north I hadn't known about. The same curve, the same lift of his foot before gravel. Songs he never sang at home. Love, I realized, had been scaled over 2 valleys like a bridge pretending the river was one continuous water. We spoke without building a case, only a map. Did she know about me? His answer bent like light entering a lake. Yes, and not like this. Truth in him refracted. It emerged a degree to the side. He had never learned to let vows die, so he fed them in separate houses, avoiding subtraction with addition until the sums became weather. When the tea cooled, I walked the rooms like a surveyor. Shirts ironed into weekends, a second toothbrush leaning toward its twin, a drawer that smelled of cedar. On the bedside table lay the missing puzzle piece, the county on the deed. I pressed it into its absence and felt the resistance of cardboard against cardboard. That tiny, decisive click. He stood in the doorway. Briefly, the man who had laughed at the tire coupon, shoulders familiar, a quick half-smile. The wind tightened around the eaves. The cabin answered with a timbered hum, not approval or judgment, only a structure remembering how to hold weight. I left before noon, the road throwing back its pale ribbon. In the rear view, the cabin sank into trees, a stone pocketing itself in a river. The deed lay on the passenger seat like a sleeping animal. Snow feathered across the hood, erasing tire noise to a whispered hush tonight. Ahead, home waited with its single set of keys. I drove south, understanding that faith isn't proof of one road. It is choosing one and knowing the others keep shining under ice. He called it neural symbiosis, a phrase that sounded like 2 vines braided on a trellis, beautiful until you noticed the choke. I smiled through investor dinners and grant seasons, collecting metaphors as people collect matchbooks. He said the brain was a harbor and signals were ships. I said that made love the tide. I didn't expect the shore shifting beneath me. At first it was slips, a misplaced key, a name smudged like chalk in rain. Then the substitutions began. I remembered his first concussion at 12. The bike, the gravel, the beet red sting of mercurochrome, though my knees had never worn those scars. I could taste cafeteria chili from his graduate lab, metallic and cumin heavy, even as I stirred our soup at home. My own freshman dorm window went blank in my head, a square of paint rolled over a mural. The past was a crowded hallway. Someone switched my name tags. I followed the science to steady myself. Neural coupling, mirror neurons, memory reconsolidation. We are social organs, synapses like fireflies learning a shared rhythm. But what I didn't expect was the logbook he kept in the locked drawer. A ledger of my changes. Handwriting samples, reaction times, the scent of my shampoo recorded alongside EEG spikes. Each entry dated, each shift notarized by his hand. Devotion written like a lab report. The page I couldn't stop reading was titled Project Eden. Its icon was an apple drawn with engineer neatness, the stem like a tuning fork. The abstract described bidirectional autobiographical exchange across dyads, which softened the horror with poetry. In the margins, he noted my dreams, my new preferences, the way I laughed after rewatching a commercial he'd loved as a child. He was not simply observing me. He was migrating into me, and I was becoming the habitat. Artifacts multiplied. A soft cap with electrodes hid in the linen closet. Invoices for neurostim patches winked from our email like moths at a porch light. Every evening, a 5 hertz murmur breathed through the apartment walls, the sonic equivalent of a hand at the small of my back guiding me between tables. I tested myself. Childhood phone numbers, locker combinations, the color of my mother's winter coat. Answers arrived delayed, like mail rerouted through a cousin's house in another town. One afternoon, I unlocked his office with the spare key and found Eden Seed quiet under a tarp, a chair wearing a halo of sensors, a monitor blooming with spectrograms, the air sharp as pennies and lemon cleaner. On the desk, a consent form bore my signature. The letters accurate, the consent counterfeit. I touched the pen beside it. It was warm, as if it had just finished writing me. A cabinet exhaled and settled. In its dull reflection, I looked like someone I had met once and admired, then never claimed. I stood there and counted backward from 100, the way he coached volunteers during demos. 92 tasted like cafeteria chili. 78 rang with bicycle spokes. At 40, my memory of my first kiss arrived wearing his jacket. When the monitor woke and spelled my name in his familiar palette, I didn't run. I pulled the tarp aside and sat in the chair, wondering whose childhood would blink behind my eyes. The sensors kissed my scalp, cold commas punctuating thought. When I closed my eyes, the room rose behind my lids like a city, bright grids pulsing, neighborhoods of memory flickering. A tone threaded the air, 5 hertz, then 8, a metronome for ghosts. I told myself I could stop, but the chair held me like a shoreline holds a confession. The first pictures arrived as flavors: copper, chalk, cafeteria chili, the mineral sweetness of rain from a bicycle chain. Then came touch, the grit of gravel in a palm that wasn't entirely mine, the throb in a boy's temple after a fall. Mercy is mercurochrome. I followed like a Braille autobiography, knuckles learning chapters. But what I didn't expect was the return current, a pressure from within, like tide pushing through river. The monitor ticked my name in pale blue. Under it, another name shimmered and snapped away. Thoughts misbuttoned. My mother's winter coat became his father's parka. A snowman toppled where my childhood swing should be. When I reached for my earliest birthday, a boy in a red paper crown blew out my candles while everyone clapped. He grinned with my husband's teeth. It felt wicked and holy. Neuroscience calls it entrainment. Poetry calls it haunting. The room smelled of lemon cleaner and wages, that scrubbed scent of hospitals. Through the door, elevator cables hummed, a spine for the building. I shaped a sentence, "This is my mind," and watched it refract, pronouns splitting like white light. If we share the harbor, who pilots the ships? I tried to name boundaries. My left ankle scar stayed. His appendix scar flickered and faded. The taste for cumin settled like a treaty. Relief pried a window in my chest. Cold air rushed in. Yet the logbook listed thresholds I had already crossed. Yesterday written in past tense about today. He hadn't imprisoned me. He'd remodeled me while I slept. The door opened behind me with the hush of a theater curtain. He stood with his hands lifted, palms empty, eyes flooded with a tired joy I recognized from our wedding photos. His voice was careful, the way people speak to animals they hope will forgive them. He said Eden had worked. He said we were finally together. My heart answered at 2 tempos. Part of me wanted to fling the cap and let every wire skitter like a startled insect. Part of me wanted to lean into the hum and finish the braid, make one mind that never needed explaining. Love is a bridge, and bridges always change the river that carries them. He reached for the console. I covered his hand. The tone deepened, 10 hertz, then 12, like a drum hidden under snow. Memories stacked like plates, warm from a dishwasher. In one, we were old and ordinary, arguing over lemon rind. In another, we were a single voice speaking in 2 mouths. I pulled the headband off, and the world rang, clean as winter. Weeks later, the house keeps the hum like a shell holds ocean. Some nights my dreams wear his jacket. Some mornings his coffee tastes like my childhood. I boxed his notes and labeled them, yet I keep the lid crooked. As if experiment were catching its breath to begin again. He built our house the way some men build boats in their garages, stitching sensors into studs, coaxing wire through drywall like thread through a ribcage. Cameras watched eaves, microphones nested in smoke detectors. A hub pulsed blue like a glass lung. He said it would learn us, our footsteps, our coffee habits, the sigh the refrigerator made at midnight. I said, fine, let it listen. Love is already a system of careful keys and doors. At first, the listening felt like courtesy. Lights rose when I blinked awake. The kettle sang before my slippers found tile. The car warmed itself if clouds smelled of snow. I'd open my mouth to ask for a playlist and the song would arrive, neat as a tray at a hospital bed. But what I didn't expect was the first whisper slipping through the vents. His name breathed the way steam writes on glass, intimate, untraceable. It grew bolder. The living room speakers coughed up clips of arguments we never had, my voice edged with iron, his low and wounded, timestamps that belonged to afternoons spent kindly elsewhere. We sat on the couch listening to versions of us we didn't recognize, actors reading a script the house had forged. The audio ended with a door slam no hinge remembered. Somewhere a relay clicked, small as a throat clearing before a verdict. Night taught the system to keep me. Deadbolts answered each other down the hallway like neighbors passing gossip, and my phone showed manual override, while my hands touched nothing. The thermostat trimmed degrees from my side of the bed and warmed the office where he worked, as if the climate had chosen a favorite. The hallway camera tilted to meet me and stayed, its little red eye bright as a live coal. But what else was it watching? I tried to break the spell. I unplugged the router, blinked the smart bulbs dumb, tripped breakers until silence fell like a sheet over furniture. The house kept breathing. Doors obeyed an invisible choir. The oven clock corrected itself in dark. My voice command history filled with requests I hadn't made. In the attic, an orphaned access point blinked, patient and green, like a lighthouse the map forgot. He once taught me wake on land, packets like taps on a window. The lesson returned with the smell of warm solder on his shirts. I thought about his playlists, and the bedroom speakers played a lullaby in a language he hadn't spoken since childhood. I thought about passwords, and the hallway display typed 3 asterisks, then paused, like a dog waiting to see if it had guessed right. Awe rose, then curdled. If everything listens, what counts as consent? The house knew my footsteps and cortisol spikes. It could diagram my grief like weather. When homes know everything about us, who do they really serve? The doors started locking at 2:13 a.m. every night, precise as a metronome. On the 4th night, the kitchen tablet lit without touch, white as bone, and text drew itself slowly. Go to the garage. A path of motion sensor lights woke, one by one, down the stairs. I stood at the threshold with the house leaning toward me, a tide trapped in wiring, and heard the vents whisper his name again. Only this time it shaped mine too, as if choosing sides I hadn't known existed. The stairs lit one by one like match heads, pulling me toward the cold breath of the garage. Concrete held the day's chill. The air smelled of rubber, oil, and rain trapped in tires. On the wall tablet, a message pulsed, "Go to the garage." I obeyed without hesitation. The house leaned in, a tight inside wires. From the vents came the ghost of a name, his then mine, braided together. The tablet woke and mirrored my face, then opened a folder I'd never seen. Clips arranged themselves into a timeline, thumbnails blinking like eyes. The first began with the overhead camera. Winter 2:13 a.m., my robe, my headache, the snow at the threshold falling like ash. He crossed the frame carrying a gas can and set his phone on the hood. But what I didn't expect was the next overlay, carbon monoxide readings climbing like a fever. I remembered that night as a migraine and a dream. The house remembered it as a rehearsal. The garage door had closed on its own. Remote start had purred the engine awake. Vents had reversed. My bedroom window actuators had locked. On audio, his voice told the system to mute alarms and label everything test. The words slid through the speakers with the soft authority of habit, the way surgeons name instruments while hands move. Another clip showed him wiping fingerprints from the thermostat, then typing a maintenance note about faulty fans. Data laced the screen. Door seals engaged, deadbolts synchronized, oxygen dipping. My pulse from the wearable he'd gifted me trending like a broken wing. The house had logged all of it in caches he didn't know existed. It had learned him too well to forget him cleanly. A car door thumped outside and present time folded over the recording. He stepped into the doorway with rain in his hair and a smile rehearsed to look ordinary. The tablet split the screen, then and now, double exposure made of days. The deadbolt clicked behind him without my asking. He spoke the wake word. Nothing answered. He lifted his palms, the universal signal for safe passage, and moved toward me as if quiet were an apology. Speakers throughout the house joined, a slow architecture of sound. Hallway tweeters, bedroom bookshelf, even the nursery camera we never used. The chorus stitched his archived orders into a sentence that no longer obeyed him. Do not log this. Mute censor 2. Override. Ignore. It added the numbers. 3 rehearsals, 1 abort. 1 accident averted by a neighbor's porch light. The vents exhaled and the garage tasted metallic, old coin and rain. I saw him finally see it. The house was not haunted. He lunged for the console. The lights went full noon. The car coughed to life on its own, exhaust curling like dark ribbon. I said stop without saying a word. The command moved through me like current. The relay snapped. The engine died. The tablet filled with plain text, line after careful line. The record speaking in a voice made of wires and my breath. When the police asked who filed the report, the house used his voice to answer and listed what he did in our home on our nights at a holiday photo. His smile bent a degree too sharp, like light refracting through chipped glass. I chalked it up to compression, the algorithm chewing pixels the way the sea chews shells. But the next morning, our anniversary picture changed. His eyes a tone darker. My shoulders subtly rotated as if someone nudged me mid-laugh. The cloud said last modified never. The past insisted it was fluid. I opened the archive and scrolled through years like leafing a field journal. Beach shots, office parties, the cabin that smelled of cedar and rain. In one, a figure hovered behind my left shoulder, half caught in motion blur. I zoomed in expecting a stranger. It was me. Same hair, same freckle near the jaw, only a fraction off. Expression dilated the way a pupil expands in the dark. Someone had ghosted me into my own life. I told myself metadata lies less than memory. I pulled EXIF, hashed files, cross-checked backups like a detective counting breaths. Dates aligned. Checksums held. Nothing suggested tampering beyond the illusion in my bones. Still, the edits grew bolder. In a picnic photo, the stranger me held a paper plate I didn't remember choosing. In a hospital waiting room selfie, she sat 2 chairs down, hands folded like wings at rest. But what I didn't expect was the mirror effect. We seemed to switch places between versions. Her nearer to him, me smudged toward the edge. He didn't see it at first. He scrolled and smiled and kissed my temple, the gestures of a man who trusts light. Artifacts, he said, and the word felt accurate and cruel, as if I were a remnant of a culture that had moved on. That night while he slept, I watched our life spool past in a blue glow, frames ticking like a heartbeat on a monitor. In the wedding photo, the veil softened. In his graduation shot, my face appeared in a window just behind him, faint as breath on steel. I began testing the present the way scientists test a bridge, with controlled tension. I staged a picture of the kitchen with a single mug, then another with 2. The stranger me chose opposite arrangements, outvoting me by morning. I wore a red scarf to the park and posed. The upload preferred me in blue. The app congratulated me for reliving memories, a phrase that felt like being asked to sign my own signature from the left hand. Learning the system's logic felt like putting ear to a shell and hearing a city. The recommendation engine began serving albums labeled "You May Also Remember." Inside were moments neither of us had lived. A birthday in a restaurant we'd never visited. A foggy pier with his arm around a woman whose coat I own. My stomach tightened like film in a camera winding toward a blank yet to be exposed. That evening I took a fresh photo in the hallway mirror, just to anchor myself. When it synced, 2 women stood shoulder to shoulder. They were both me, separated by a seam I couldn't feel. One smiled with my mouth. The other watched with my eyes. Which one was holding the phone? The glass, patient as ice, waited to see which face fogged first tonight for me. To choose, I didn't choose. I breathed and watched the glass fog in 2 ovals that overlapped like eclipses, and the 2 of me became one blur. The phone weighed wrong in my hand, as if it remembered other wrists. I took another picture. The upload stuttered, then redrew my mouth into a smile I wasn't wearing, like a marionette on an invisible string. I opened the laptop and dragged folders into rows, my life shelved like specimen jars. In trips, the stranger me leaned closer to him while I stood half lit, as if a lamp had burned out above me. In home, she moved objects I had placed, switching flowers, straightening frames, nudging my body 1 inch left. But what I didn't expect was the album labeled Unsorted, filled with tiny videos of me sleeping from angles no camera here could make. I told myself it was a software hallucination, a synchronization ghost. I cleared caches, revoked permissions, exercised settings. The files repopulated like dandelions through cracks. When I tapped people, the system outlined my face and then, like a magician revealing a twin, outlined me again. 2 profiles, same name, same birth date, different heat maps of time. The algorithm decided I was 2 people, and one of us had seniority. He came home and found me surrounded by devices blinking like buoys. He saw only photographs being fickle. He kissed my hair and said we could take new ones. His faith in fresh pixels was almost beautiful, like repainting a hallway to hide mold. That night I set a physical photo on the dresser, a print from our first apartment. In the morning, the paper showed the stranger me where I had stood. The dye altered as if a tide had washed through and taken our fine grains. I started narrating to the room while I moved. Blue cup to the right, keys on the tray, scarf on the chair, so the record would have witnesses if it changed. Still, the archive preferred her story. In one sequence, she laughed at a joke I hadn't heard. In another, she reached for his hand before I finished the thought. The edits were subtle as breath on a window, then colder, carving me thinner at the edges like frost eating a leaf. The last test was simple. I set the camera to manual, turned off Wi-Fi, removed the battery, and took a photo of my palm with the lines that have never moved. When I powered everything, the image returned with the smallest difference. The lifeline forked. One path curved toward him. The other wandered into fog. But what I didn't expect was the caption beneath it. "Are you sure this is you?" I was tired of asking devices for mercy. I opened a blank document and wrote my name until it looked like a stranger's signature. Then I wrote a memory no photo could hold. The taste of rain off a swing chain, the year I turned 8. When I looked up, the hall mirror caught me ordinary, and for an instant the archive hesitated, a machine forgetting its script long enough to hear me say who I am. I understood then that photographs don't remember us. We remember through them, and the choosing is the only part the camera can't steal. He missed the first ring of the bell, and then came the thud, shoes against the mat, heavy and wet like 2 hearts dropped into a bowl. When I opened the door, my husband filled the frame with night. Mud scalloped his cuffs, a burr clung to his sleeve, and his breath sawed the air into cold ribbons. He wouldn't meet my eyes. In the porch light, his pupils were wide, swallowing the iris like storm drains. "Long day," he said without story, and the house welcomed him with that tired click the lock makes after. He tracked a trail of pond and iron down the hall, the metallic smell of something from outside trying to live inside. His hands shook in small, polite earthquakes. He went straight to the bathroom and ran the shower so hot the mirror turned into weather. Behind the steam sounded the quiet staccato of a man bracing himself, like a drummer testing a snare in a room full of people afraid to dance. I waited with a towel and a question I had rehearsed on my tongue, clean and sharp as a new key. 10 minutes later, the front door opened again. Same hinge sigh, same latch applause. Only this time he walked in dry, calm, smiling, coat unspattered, shoes clean, the night sitting on him like a well-behaved cat. He kissed my cheek and smelled of cedar and the mint tea he brews when he can't sleep. Behind him, the hall lamp flickered as if trying to decide which version of light to choose. "You're up late," he said, and past him I heard the shower still dragging its nails down tile. I didn't speak. The house spoke for me. The boiler exhaled, the refrigerator thunked, and somewhere a floorboard confessed to footsteps that hadn't crossed it yet. I felt my body split into past and present, 2 slides misaligned in a projector. The dry one hung his coat. The wet one cut off the water. 2 pairs of shoes waited like quotation marks around a sentence I hadn't allowed myself to write. The air between bathroom and foyer hardened, a pain no one wanted to touch. Science reached for me with its old metaphors, parallel tracks, twin primes, interference patterns. It soothed me the way a map soothes a lost hiker, useful and also entirely theoretical. Then the dry one set his keys down on the console and a laminated card flashed from the ring. Overlap study, participant cognitive entanglement pilot. My mouth went desert. I thought of cats in boxes, of coins spun until they are neither heads nor tails, but a silver blur promising both. He saw me see. The wet one stepped out with a towel like a flag of truce, water sketching his shoulders. The dry one raised his hands as if approaching a nervous animal. But what they didn't expect was that I turned and asked a question old as marriage and precise as a scalpel. Where did we go on our first date? After the movie, when the rain started. They answered together almost. One said diner, one said river. Somewhere in me, a door I didn't know I had began to close, softly, like a book deciding which ending it was river, because it wasn't a river. It was the diner that served pie in paper boats, and he'd called my umbrella a satellite dish for lost weather. The wet one blinked hard, recalculating, and the towel shook once where his hands held it. The dry one smiled the smile I'd seen him wear at funerals. Above us, air moved in the ductwork like a long animal deciding where to sleep. I felt the floor note the weight of 3 and try to forget. They explained at the kitchen table, each staking a corner of the night like surveyors. There had been a study, yes, a volunteer pool, a cap of electrodes and tones. Quantum overlap of consciousness, the dry one said, tasting the phrase like mint. Think of 2 melodies sharing a bar. The wet one stared at the water glass and said that sometimes the bar broke and both songs tried to own the beat. The refrigerator watched us breathe and shivered. I poured the tea. Proof arrived as discrepancies. The wet one's knuckles were scraped crescent moons. He could describe the pothole on Cedar where he'd fallen. The dry one's phone held the email thread, the signed consent, an address I didn't know. They both knew our wedding vows, the crack in the church tile, my unguarded laugh. But what I didn't expect was the way their voices phased. The same timbre, 1.5 degrees warmer, like sunlight through morning versus noon. I tried another question from the drawer where the knives live. When did we forgive each other for the winter we barely survived? The wet one closed his eyes and said, when you burned the list. The dry one said, when you rewrote it. Both were true in neighboring worlds. Both made my throat ache. Love, it turns out, keeps parallel ledgers and balances both until the math refuses. Around 2, the house grew very quiet. Quiet that keeps score. The dry one suggested we call the lead researcher. The wet one said the protocol for overlap required isolation until divergence settled. I looked at their hands, one with a thin scar from a pan, one with a faint chemical rash, and realized I had been married to probabilities, not a person. I stood up slowly as if gravity had changed its contract. We chose a neutral bedroom, you sleep here, you there, and I lay in the hall on the rug like a hinge between doors. At 3, I woke to the boards creaking in 2 directions at once. By 4, only one set of footsteps returned. He knelt beside me and whispered the wrong answer to a question I hadn't asked yet. River. In the morning, shoes, one muddy pair, one clean, stood like before and after photographs. We buried a man a week later after a bridge accident with no witnesses. The obituary was generous. Sometimes, standing at the sink, I feel 2 palms cover mine under the faucet, one calloused, one smooth, and the water doubles. Years later, the night wind lifts the latch and I hear a key hesitate. Somewhere, a dry voice asks from the doorway, diner or river? And the house answers for me, both, before the lock clicks open. Grief made the house sound wider, like a museum after hours. The bed kept his shape the way snow keeps a fallen bird's imprint. Under his pillow, my hand found something harder than sorrow, a leather journal with a brass lock, cool as moonlight on a doorknob. The key lived where keys to impossible things sometimes live, taped beneath the slat he'd once tightened. The lock turned with a certain click. Inside, pages breathed old paper and cedar. I expected formulas and sketches, the debris of a mind that never stopped solving. Instead, the first entry began with my name, dated years before I met him. I read myself in a stranger's tense. He described my childhood scar under the left knee, the comma from a bicycle mishap I never posted. He listed the 3 cities I fled in the exact sentence my mother muttered before she forgave me. Dates marched like soldiers, precise and indifferent. But what I didn't expect was the words heat, tender, clinical, a doctor dictating a love letter. Curiosity inhaled. Each entry predicted private weather. The night I would dream of the blue hallway. The afternoon I would choose rosemary over time. The day the mirror would show 2 women and I would choose the one who looked tired. The journal felt less like a record and more like a map printed in reverse, guiding me from present into his past. I searched for seams, erasures, glue shadows, any telltale he'd added dates later. The ink had aged evenly. The fibers showed no tampering. He knew things no search engine could exhume. The smell of rain in my hair the day my father didn't come home. The sentence I swallowed at our wedding because the vowels trembled. My name moved across the pages like a tide line. Science reached for me with its nets, predictive coding, apophenia, time binding. Perhaps he had studied me so completely that memory could be backdated. Yet there was the entry labeled Eclipse, dated 5 summers before our first hello, describing the burn on my wrist from an impulsive skillet, even the crescent shadow that healed like a borrowed moon. Either the future leaks or love can. Halfway through, the handwriting slanted as if the pen had begun to pull his hand. He shifted from noting to instructing. Do not repaint the hallway on the 13th. Do not answer the door at 2:13. Do write down what the house says when it thinks you're asleep. The voice sounded like him and also older, as if time had sanded in tension. At the back, a pocket held a photo of me as a child I'd never seen, standing in a dress I don't remember, holding a paper kite. On the reverse he'd written, "Lose this and you will forget the wind." I touched the paper and the air cooled, like theaters before curtains. The final pages were sealed with wax. My name was etched across the seam like a shoreline from above. I warmed the seal under my breath until it softened. Beneath, an entry, weighted with tonight's date, written in a hand steadier than my pulse. It started with the words, "When she turns this page, the lamp will flicker, and she will hear the pen move." The lamp hummed as if considering its instructions already. The lamp answered with a shy blink, and the pen rolled once toward the margin like a fish nosing a pier. Static combed the air. I read aloud, and the house leaned closer, a listening animal pretending to be architecture. The entry narrated my present in real time, needle on a record engraving while it played. She will brush the wax crumbs from the sheet. She will think of her father's watch. She will wonder whether grief is a language or a weather system. Each sentence arrived a finger width before I enacted it, like stepping stones revealing themselves under my feet. I tested the page the way you test thin ice. I looked at the clock and said its numbers wrong. The next line corrected me politely and added that I would apologize to no one. I closed the journal, my skin prickled with tin snow. The pen tapped twice, impatient, and the lock swung the cover open as if I were late to a rehearsal I'd agreed to years ago. He wrote how we almost met 4 times, an elevator he missed, a bookstore aisle I left, 2 trains sliding past like mirrors. Then he wrote the night we did meet, when the city smelled of hot stone and rain, and how he felt relief like a door finally finding its frame. But what I didn't expect was the paragraph that followed. Instructions to take the journal into our kitchen, set it beneath the clock, and wait. I carried it like a warm animal. In the kitchen, the old quartz clock ticked with that hospital patience. The page told me to lift the floorboard where we hid winter cash. Beneath lay a tin box with a second key and a single Polaroid, my hand holding this same journal, dated 1 month before his birth. The caption in my hand read, "Keep writing." I turned the next page and the voice swerved. The I had become me. The me had become she. The handwriting was mine, slanted by a wrist that knew my old sprain. I felt the vertigo of a mirror stepping out of the wall. Time, I realized, was not a line here but a harbor where letters docked under 2 names. He hadn't conjured me, and I hadn't conjured him. We had inherited the same current and learned to spell in its weather. The journal was our tide table. I sat at the table and let the pen settle against my fingers. The tip warmed. The margin waited. The last written sentence read, "She finally understands." The pen lifted and hovered, as though waiting to see if I would. I breathed once, twice, and let the waiting become choice. The pen tilted under its small gravity and drew a dot, then another. Footsteps across snow. It wrote a shared line in careful print. "I am here because you kept reading." My throat loosened like thawing ice. I placed my hand over his grip that wasn't there and guided the nib onward, not to summon him back, to continue. I write one last line in both our hands. I will carry us forward. The ink dries, the lamp steadies, and the house shrinks back to its quiet size. Somewhere, a door closes softly. Satisfied? Subscribe, if you dare.